Welcome to the Organized Expat, brought to you by Tytle, the platform for expat taxes. Hi Laurens,
Hi.
Working for a foreign employer in Portugal. First of all, your salary, do you have to report that in Portugal if you do that?
Right, so if you live in Portugal,
Yeah.
then you need to file your worldwide income anyway.
Yeah.
So all your worldwide income sources, no matter if it's Portuguese sourced or foreign sourced.
Yeah.
And on top of that, employment income is typically seen as Portuguese sourced income, even if it's for a foreign employer, just based on how Portugal and most of the countries see that. So if you live and work in Portugal, if the activities are carried out in Portugal, then it's seen as Portuguese sourced income, even if it's for a foreign employer.
Yeah.
But if, for example, let's say an American company, if you're doing all the work at an office in New York, so if you fly to New York and you do the work there, then it's seen as foreign sourced income, American sourced income. And then you look at NHR again, so if you have NHR, then foreign sourced income, it would be exempt, or NHR 2.0.
Yeah.
And if you don't have NHR and you perform the work abroad, for example, then you could claim a tax credit, for example. Or if you just do the work in Portugal, then Portugal can tax it.
Yeah.
It might, depending on the other country, it might also be taxed there, and then you look at the tax treaty again to balance that out.
Yeah,
but effectively you pay the taxes in Portugal as well if you just work in Portugal, live in Portugal, and do the work in Portugal.
Yeah, so maybe there's a misconception here, a misunderstanding about how it works, but if you are working for example, a German employer and you're doing that from Portugal and you live in Portugal and you're a tax resident in Portugal, then it qualifies just as Portuguese salary that you're getting and not as German salary, even though the salary comes from Germany and they transfer to your bank account from Germany, it still counts as Portuguese salary because you're living in Portugal.
Exactly.
So maybe that's good to point that out. And next, so if you have a foreign employer and you're working for the foreign employer from Portugal, do they have to register in Portugal?
Yeah, it depends a bit, but generally speaking, you have to handle the tax obligations yourself if you live in Portugal.
Yeah.
There's just one scenario if you are, if the company has a permanent establishment, and a permanent establishment is a branch abroad, let's say. So if a German company, in our example, has a branch in Portugal, then often that you will be under contract by that permanent establishment, and they will withhold taxes and everything for you. It can even be that you are seen as the permanent establishment. If you have a significant role, for example, within the company, then you move abroad. That basically extends the company to Portugal as well. So then you are basically seen as an extension of the company as a permanent establishment in Portugal. And then the company needs to be compliant, withhold taxes, everything.
So registering in Portugal as an employer and withholding taxes, typically that's not necessary, but if there's a branch in Portugal as well, or if you, the employee, is in a way the branch because they're important enough to be considered as a, what's it called, a permanent establishment, then that could indeed trigger those obligations. Okay, question 3, what happens if your foreign employer is already withholding taxes in your home country or in another country? I think that's the way to put it.
It depends a little bit on if it was justified that they were withholding the taxes. So my previous example that you're carrying out the work in your office in New York, and they withhold taxes, then
it's justified, so then it's okay.
Fine. So you will effectively end up paying them there after application of the tax treaty. If it was wrong, so if you're, for example, if you move to Portugal, but your company abroad kept withholding taxes for you, and you thought that you didn't have to report them or file them or pay taxes over them in Portugal, then that situation often needs to be repaired, because then actually you should have paid tax in Portugal, and then if you also pay tax abroad, that can be subtracted, for example, from the Portuguese taxes. But often you then enter a situation where you need to repair and stabilize your tax situation.
Yeah, so it all depends on whether it was correct or not to withhold those taxes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's in a nutshell. That's what's going on here. Okay, do I have to pay Social Security in Portugal if I work for an employer?
So general rules that you contribute to the Portuguese social security system if you live and work there, so that you pay into the system. But if Portugal has a social security agreement with another country, or if the other country is an EU country, then you can get an A1 certificate, and you can keep, under certain circumstances and sometimes for a certain duration, keep paying your social securities in your home country.
Okay, and
so that's possible, yeah.
Yeah, so then it doesn't shift to Portugal if there is such an agreement.
And if there's not, then you or your employer might have to register in Portugal for that, for social security, social security contribution purposes.
All clear, I think. Working remotely for a foreign employer, does it create issues for your employer if you work remotely from Portugal?
Yes, and sometimes we often hear that employers don't want it. They tell people, okay, please become a contractor because we just don't want to even think about it and have all the hassle and headache. But yet, from a tax perspective, biggest risk is mostly if you trigger a permanent establishment abroad, because then they get more reporting obligations in Portugal. Might, for example, even have to think about corporate tax filing in Portugal,
exactly.
for example. So they typically don't want that. So that's from a tax perspective, and also it's just all the double filing and things like that.
Extra paperwork
that companies might want to prevent. But in theory, with correct tax treaty applications, everything should be possible.
Yeah, but it could create issues or paperwork.
And maybe also with the permanent establishment, it's also always a case-by-case situation. So if you are the revenue driver of the company, and you move to Portugal, then that's probably going to be a permanent establishment. If there's a company with 10,000 people, and you move to Portugal and you, with all due respect, have more of an insignificant role, then
you won't be a permanent establishment.
Exactly,
Okay. Last question. If you move to Portugal and you want to work for a foreign employer, what would be your first step?
So the first step is basically to see if you're actually a tax resident in Portugal, if you're going to live in Portugal, and then making the analysis, okay, how much time am I going to spend in Portugal, how much time abroad? So you also know, for example, if you have to tell your foreign company to stop withholding taxes because you actually need to pay them in Portugal, or maybe the case is different and you need to keep paying taxes abroad. That depends on all kind of things, so how much time you spend in each country, the tax treaty. That's all kind of things that we can assist with. So also the planning ahead, and then also making sure that the filing is smooth in both countries.
So first step, it's often very important to do that well, and we're very happy to help you with that. You can also go to our website, www.title.io. I think that was it for today, and thanks for watching or listening, and hope to see you again next time.